everybody, it's Miss Seward. Today we're going to be doing our notes for section 2.3, where you're going to be learning about island biogeography. And the learning objective for today's information is going to be that you can describe island biogeography and describe the role of island biogeography in evolution. You're going to learn about what this study is, how it is that different organisms and the relationships that they have on islands, and then some of the evolution that has occurred based on these island populations and what impacts this evolution that's occurring. Now, island biogeography is the study of the ecological relationships and the community structures on islands. Now, it's important to note that this can be talking about actual islands, like in a body of water, or it can also be figurative habitat islands, such as Central Park in New York City. So if you were to look at Central Park as an example, it might not be surrounded by a body of water, but it basically is going to be like an island because there's no way for organisms to be moving in between different ecosystems or different areas because it's surrounded by urbanization and city. So it effectively is going to have the properties of an island ecosystem. Now, there's going to be two basic rules or observations that we make when it comes to island biogeography. And the first one is going to be the idea that larger islands support more total species. And we're going to dive into this more throughout the notes, but these are kind of the big rules to remember to start from the get-go. And the second basic rule is going to be that islands closer to the mainland are going to support more species. So if we were to look at this image, if you're going to look at these two, which are the same distance away, the bigger one is going to have more species. If you look at this legend here, the bigger it is, the more number of species you have, versus a smaller island is going to have a smaller number of species. Then these islands down here, one is closer, it's going to have more species diversity, and the far one is going to have less species. Now, specifically, we'll look at this rule that larger islands support more species. Now, larger islands are going to have higher ecosystem diversity, which means there's going to be more available niches or roles that different organisms can play into. There's also going to be more food and habitat resources on these larger islands. An example of this is going to be all the different food options that are available to birds on the Galapagos Islands, and we'll look at that case study later in these notes. But if you were to look at the different habitat zones in the Galapagos on this island, if you've got down here in the arid zone, there's going to be more like cacti. It's going to be kind of drier. Versus if you look at the Pampa zone up here, it's going to be higher up in elevation, but you're going to have more plants, which is going to be different types of resources up there. So you end up having more available niches that these organisms can go into and just different types of food and habitat resources for the species there. Now, additionally, what you end up getting is that larger population sizes are going to be more genetically diverse, which means they're also resistant to environmental disturbances or to extinction. So if a hurricane comes and wipes off the southern half of the island, it's a big island. You've still got all the organisms on the northern half. Or if you've got a disease that comes through, if you have more organisms, they're going to have more genetic diversity, which will give them more of a likelihood to survive, not disease. And what we're going to see is a positive correlation between island size and species richness. Now, positive correlation is going to be some terminology that will be beneficial for us to use when we're talking about relationships. And positive correlation means that as the variables, like as one goes up, the other one would be going up as well. They're doing the same thing. So specifically here, if we're looking at this graph where we've got the number of species on the y-axis and then the island size on the x-axis here, as it goes up, you're going to see that it's a positive correlation. As the island size goes up, we also see species richness going up on these islands here. Now, the second rule is going to be the distance to the mainland. Now, remember that the closer you are to the mainland, it means that the higher species richness you have. And this is because it's going to be easier for species to migrate from the island to the mainland. They're going to be able to swim, or they're going to be able to fly. If it's closer, it's easier for them to go back and forth. You're also, over time, going to get more continual migration of individuals to this island habitat, and more migration is going to bring in more genetic diversity and also just a general larger population size of those organisms that are moving over. So, for example, if we're to look at this diagram here, if you've got your mainland and the different colors and shapes represent different species, if island A is closest, you're going to have a good amount of them that can either fly or swim to get here. Island B is a bit farther, so maybe some of the species have that range when it comes to flying. Now we go to island C over here. There's only going to be one species that's able to make that entire journey, so island C is going to have not so much species richness. Island A, which is closer to the mainland, is going to have higher species richness there. Now, the terminology that we would use to describe this relationship is called an inverse relationship. And this is where you are going to have, on a graph, you're going to see an inverse relationship means that they do the opposite. So as the distance increases, the species richness decreases. So the further away you get from the mainland, the fewer species that you are going to have. So it's an inverse relationship. Now, what we do see on islands is over time, we end up having evolution. And this is because islands have limited space and resources. So this ends up creating more unique conditions for evolution to happen because there's more pressure for species to adapt to have narrower niches. So they have more specific food, more specific habitat, and this is in order to decrease our competition. So if you think back to competition that we learned about with Unit 1 and how you have this resource partitioning, you're going to end up having evolution occurring so that these species are going to have different niches so that they are not competing so much with organisms. Now, this process of evolution, we call it adaptive radiation. And this is where you see a single species rapidly evolving into several new species in order to use different resources and reduce that competition. And an example is the Galapagos finches on the Galapagos Island. What they ended up having was different beaks quickly evolved in order to fit a variety of different food sources on the island. So if we look at this massive tree of the different types of birds, finches specifically, that you have on the Galapagos Island, if we look at this original common ancestor who started here in the mainland, it was the single species that originally colonized from mainland. But you end up getting so many adaptations that the other organisms are going to be slightly different from this original one. So again, if we're looking at the common ancestor right here, on the Galapagos Island, there's a variety of food sources. So we've got like cactus, seeds, insects, birds. And if you look at the color coordinated in this tree here, it shows you what the different bird species eat. So like the blue ones are going to eat insects. The green one here is going to eat buds. We have seeds, and specifically a couple of them eat cactus flowers. And if you look at their beaks have different shapes for what they eat. These beaks are going to be going after like kind of quick, small insects here. These beaks are going to be eating seeds, so they need to be bigger and able to crunch down on those seeds. And we saw this adaptive radiation just based on the different resources, so that competition was decreasing between these finches. So now you have your practice FRQ for 2.3. And what I want you to do for this, you're going to be practicing your suggested skill of describing environmental concepts and processes. And what you're going to do is describe the process of colonizing an island habitat. Then describe how the island's distance from the mainland influences the number of species that will colonize the island habitat. So that will be your practice FRQ. And those were your notes on section 2.3, which was island biogeography.